The hospital started getting angry with me because my C-section rate was only 3% and the other doc was 33%. And he was making the hospital a lot more money than me. And so they started getting angry with me and bringing me in saying, oh, you're going to be a liability of this hospital if you don't start doing more C-sections.
There's a false notion in our society. I'll take care of you if you take care of me. But the truth is, if we actually take care of ourselves first, only then can we change our life, change our homes, change our cities, our relationships, and eventually change the world. For those of you who appreciate the holistic lifestyle, you've come to the right place. Your host, Emanuel, is a certified emotion and body code practitioner and certified group energy facilitator. You are now listening to Healing the Healer podcast.
This show is brought to you by Heal, the social media platform for those who love the holistic lifestyle. Are you tired of sharing holistic tips and getting banned or going to Facebook jail for sharing the truth? Are you tired of all the Facebook political drama? Tired of people who don't support energy healing growth? My wife Jess and I created a social media platform that was meant for people who love social media, communicating with like-minded people, and love learning hacks from other wellness practitioners. It's free to join. www.haveempathyandlove.com. Plus, every week you have the option and choice to opt into a cutting-edge healing group where you get energy healing for 7 days straight. Again, it's free to join, www.haveempathyandlove.com. All right, welcome to Healing the Healer podcast. I'm so excited for our special guest, Scott Werner, who's a medical doctor here, and so excited for you to be here. And I want to do a really quick bio about him, just so you guys know who is here and his accomplishments. So if you don't mind, I'm going to embarrass you for a little bit. But
All right.
So he practiced medicine starting out as an OBGYN, but became medical intuitive after curing his own cancer with herbs and healing energy. He voluntarily gave up his medical practice to focus on the real cause of dis-ease. He now lives in St. George, Utah with his wife and children. Scott uses herbs, homeopathic, energetic remedies, and chelation to help improve and heal untreatable illnesses and diseases, helping thousands of patients. Scott currently does intuitive medical readings for clients, putting them on the products which will help them the most. Scott currently lectures to many groups, including professionals in Nevada, California, Hawaii, Florida, Missouri, Iowa, Colorado, Arizona, and Utah, teaching about healing and the ascension, homeopathics, essential oils, energy medicine, and spiritual healing. Scott has been told by lecture attendees that he is one of the most informative animated speakers they've ever heard. Scott studied traditional medicine, herbs, essential oils, homeopathics, Reiki touch healing, and many other modalities. Scott can instantly know what people need to heal through spiritual readings. Scott currently treats patients all over the United States, Canada, Central and South America, Australia, Asia, Africa, and Europe. And let's talk about his books. He actually wrote 3 books here. One of them is Take Back Your Health, and it's the first book written by him back in 2012. It was channeled from kahunas in Hawaii, and experiences happen spontaneously from the stories. It vibrates in unconditional love and helps you heal just by being in your energy field. You intuitively open the book and choose what chapter to read and do so each day, each month, or a couple of months. It's been working perfectly as an oracle book. So hold the book, as he would say. Open to it where your soul feels, and the chapter will be the message for you to heal. So according to David Hawkins, which I'm a big fan of, Map of Consciousness, it vibrates at 780, which is in pure consciousness and enlightenment and health. The second book is the next step in human evolution, written and published in April 2015, is the answer to the question, what do we do about all the toxins, parasites, fungus, virus, petrochemicals, nanobots, and radiation in our environment, causing us to all get sick? This will be a good one. St. Germain materialized and gave us the answer and the story of the visitation of this book. And the third book Father Gabriel Mejia, is that pronounced right? A modern-day saint. Saint Germain sent you the Medellin, Colombia essay.
Medellin, Colombia.
Medellin, Colombia. Okay. Essay to heal and to live with Father Gabriel Mejia, a Claritin priest who creates hogares claret, is that right? To help all the disposable ones, quote unquote, children orphaned in the cocaine wars started by our own CIA. So we have a lot of stuff to talk about. So I'm excited about this. That was just a mouthful. But let's start off with this. First of all, I like to always start off the podcast with gratitude. And maybe you can share what are 3 things you're grateful for. And first of all, welcome to the podcast.
Well, thank you for having me. Number one, I'm very grateful whenever I'm interviewed because that sends the message out to more people. And the other thing I'm really grateful for is all the ascended masters serving under God, whoever you feel is deity. And I've had a real nice life because I've met at least 18 different ascended masters, which is pretty remarkable in and of itself. So I'm very grateful for that. And I'm grateful for a wife who supports me in all of this, even though I scare the heck out of her a lot of times. And because I've put us kind of in jeopardy with our federal government and state agencies because I don't do what is popular.
Hey, I mentioned earlier that, truth goes through 3 stages. It's violently opposed, it's ridiculed, and then it becomes self-evident, right? And that's author Schopenhauer in Germany, a philosopher, a business philosopher. But yeah, I think what we need now is kind of like people awakening themselves to what's really, really happening. And I think more and more, I think the internet and access to information is assisting us in this sort of awakened process with the earth and what's really happening. Because I feel like there's been kind of like this sort of scales over our eyes, and it's finally getting peeled off because I think people just are seeking truth. And when you see a man or a woman who's seeking truth, nothing will stop them from finding it. And it's people like yourself who are perhaps not afraid to share what's really happening, but still maybe there's opposition, and it could be tough. But tell me, that's a huge transition. My mother was a oncologist, hematologist, but she received heavy opposition at Kaiser Permanente for doing her practices in her garage, checking people's alkalinity and acidity in their body, seeing what they ate, and just really cared for their wellness. And Kaiser was not about that. And so, but tell me, how did you go from the OBGYN to what you do now? Like where did you draw the line and say, okay, I need to start looking deeper into what's really happening in the body?
Well, there's a little bit of history behind me becoming an OB. I've had the gift of clairvoyance my entire life. As a little kid, I could see people's auras, and I'd tell them, "Oh, boy, you look dark today," and they'd beat me up, and it was quite interesting. And by the time I was 13, I had my first near-death experience. And after that experience, I just didn't want to do anything bad, and I wanted to focus on my education and just being a top-notch human being rather than doing stupid stuff. And I did serve a mission for the Lds Church, and that's how I learned Spanish. I went to Puerto Rico and spent a year and a half, and then I was in the St. Thomas for a month, and then in Hialeah, Florida, and that's where all the Cubanos are. And so I learned Spanish. And then I had a near-death experience in Puerto Rico. And so each time I had a near-death experience, I came back with a different gift. When I had my 13-year-old problem, I came back with clairsentience, so I could feel things in people. It was really strange. I could feel them in my organs and everything. And after my near-death in Puerto Rico, I got hit by a car going about 60 miles an hour and was thrown into a telephone pole. Woke up with a sheet over my head, and I'd been declared dead. I had a broken femur, broken humerus, broken back. And when I threw the sheet off, I sat up and everybody was like, "Oh, don't move. You have a broken back and all this." And I'm like, I feel okay. And they called the doctor back up, and he says, "Can I re-x-ray your body?" And he did. And all of my bones, he had my x-rays when I came in and the x-rays that we did once I woke up. And there was nothing really broken in the second set of x-rays. So it was like a miracle. I had a miracle healing. And I don't remember anything except that car hitting me and getting thrown in the telephone pole. And I couldn't remember anything after that. But anyway, after that, I had what we call clairaudience. I could hear the voice of Jesus in my head, which was pretty cool because whenever I had a question, I'd just ask and I'd get the answer. And so, and at that time, I was kind of wanting to become a musician because I'd done a lot of study with music, but I'd never seen any very few musicians make any money. And we grew up poor, so I wanted to make money. And so, coming back from that second near-death experience, I decided, well, I actually came back knowing I had to go to medical school. And so when I got home off my mission, I started going to college and completed my bachelor's degree in chemistry and biology. And then I went on to medical school at St. Louis University. And it was interesting because I actually got accepted to 8 different medical schools, but St. Louis University spiritually felt like that's where I needed to be. And it was really interesting because I needed a job because by then I was married and had two little kids and had to keep my family fed. So I moonlighted, which they told us not to do. So I was a rule breaker in the beginning of medical school. And I got a job with a law firm that was defending Monsanto Corporation over Agent Orange and dioxin. And I learned all about the toxicity of those things and actually had to interview linemen for the telephone companies and the electrical companies and see if their symptoms and pathology coincided with dioxin and Agent Orange. And all of them that I interviewed and did physical exam on, they demonstrated those problems. And so Monsanto's lawyers decided to settle out of court, and they settled for $4,000 per lineman, which was not even enough to cover their medical costs, but they did get it out of the way. And but I learned how toxic these chemicals were and what a huge problem these chemicals are in our environment. So that was part of my education. And when I was a third-year medical student, we actually played doctor down at St. Louis City Hospital, which was a public hospital for all the inner-city poor people. And when I say we played doctor, my very first day, third-year medical student, I was supposed to watch a delivery, and it was right during the AIDS crisis, and everybody was totally fearful of bodily fluids, anything, because they didn't even know really what was causing it back then, because it was 1984. And the girl was a 14-year-old heroin addict, so she had even that against her with the possibility of having infections of bad viruses and things. And so the intern was sitting down ready to deliver the baby, and the girl grabbed a hold of his arms and let out this blood-curdling scream and literally dug her fingernails into his arms and pulled and literally tore into his forearms, and then her bag of water busted all over his body. And he just freaked out. He's like got these blood coming out of his arms and fluids all over him, and he was afraid he was going to get something. So he threw his hand in the air and he says, "I'm out of here. I got to go wash up. You take care of the delivery." And I was like, holy cow, because I wasn't even able to watch my kids be born because my wife had a C-sections. And So this was my first delivery, and I hadn't even really watched one before, except on a video. And so I sat down in the driver's seat, and she let out another scream, and out comes this baby. But as soon as the baby came out, I got really distracted with my clairvoyance because the heavens opened up. And as soon as the baby took a breath, the soul went into the little baby's body, and it was so freaking cool. I was like, I've got to do this for a living.
Right?
Yeah.
And after that, you have to do that.
Yeah. So that's why I became an OBGYN. I could see the heavens open up with every baby, and it was just so cool. I just really enjoyed it. And so anyway, I finished medical school and did my internship there in St. Louis at St. Louis University Hospitals, and had another near-death experience after I got a flu shot. I had a reaction to a flu shot. They required us all. It was the first flu shot I'd ever taken, and I was sicker than heck and stopped breathing, and they had to resuscitate me there at the hospital. And I was doing a surgical rotation when it was happening, and I was so sick, they stuck an IV in me, and they made me work anyway, even though I was sicker than heck and had died in front of them. They made me go and go through charts and sign charts and stuff. Oh, it was kind of interesting. But during that experience, I came back with what they call claircognizance. I would know things about people. And so it made my diagnostic skills perfect because, with the voice of Jesus, knowing what was wrong with people, I became a very excellent diagnostician. In fact, the attending physicians, the guys in charge, would blame me for going in early and reading people's charts, because I always knew what was wrong with people, and it irritated some of the attendings because they didn't even know what was wrong with a lot of the people. So it's been an interesting life.
So I'm guessing they didn't, obviously, clairaudience and all these different clairs weren't available to them. And I guess there had to be some jealousy involved, the fact that you can see it right away in someone, because I think those gifts, I believe everyone has some form of clair in them, and there's ways to develop them. I know there's many books out there, how to develop this clair, how to this clair, but it seems like you became good friends with death, multiple times. But I've heard that you're not the only story. I can probably name a few people on a list where their near-death experience, they came back with something unique, that the veil became thinner because of their experience on the other side. So that's really special. And then how did your wife, with all these gifts? I mean, first of all, I know there's a saying where it says you're supposed to leave your lab coat or your doctor's coat at work, but you can't shut off your clairs. So you took Claire home. I'm just curious, how was that with having a wife? Like, there was probably some very interesting episodes of she's like, why can't you just be normal? Yeah, right. Yeah. So how did she kind of get used to it, or was it tough? How did that, for those people who have clair gifts and maybe they have a spouse who doesn't really get them, maybe they don't understand them? Yeah,
my first wife did not understand me at all, and she was very, very into other things. And when I came home with all these different things, we kind of became more and more estranged from each other because she thought I was weird. And so it became a little difficult in the marriage, but, being married in the temple and everything, you just stay together.
Right.
And love each other. And so I did that. Now, she wanted to move closer to home, so we moved to Phoenix, and I got a residency there as an OBGYN at Good Sam Medical Center. It's known as Banner now, down in Phoenix. And it was pretty interesting. Well, first off, I got exposed to a lethal dose of radiation in St. Louis when I was an intern. I was in doing surgery with an oncologist, and he put radioactive iridium tubes in the vagina because she had vaginal stage 4 cancer, and he was going to burn it up with this radioactive iridium. And he didn't tighten the tubes as well as he should have, and so it was leaking during the middle of the night. I was the intern on call. The nurses called me up saying, "This woman's screaming her head off. You need to come help us." And so I went there, and there's all, these radioactive signs. Don't go in the room because it's all radioactive. And so I gloved up with leaded gloves and an apron and a mask and sleeves and gloves, the whole bit. And I went in and I cleaned her up, and she was literally getting burned up from all the iridium draining on her buttocks. And so her buttocks was even getting burned up. So I cleaned her up as best I could and put Silvadine on the burns and put all the radioactive materials in a receptacle. And
is that a normal procedure though? Like
it was.
Or is this more of an experimental?
It was more experimental back then,
right.
And it was very dangerous because I was actually helping him in there, and it was one of my first surgical procedures like that. And so I was watching him do it, and, I was just questioning everything because here it is radioactive as heck. And when I got all my gown and gloves and everything off, I looked at my badge, and it had turned black, which meant I had been exposed to a lethal dose of radiation. Well, within a year, when we moved to Phoenix, I started getting headaches, and my upper back was aching, and I had a mole that was kind of bugging me. And so I went in and had the mole biopsied, and it was malignant melanoma, but it had a little thing going down, a track going down into my spine. And so they did another biopsy, and they found a tumor on my spine. And the radiologist there at Good Sam, he says, "Scott, let's put you in this new MRI," because, MRIs were brand new, and we had just bought one at Good Sam. And so I was one of the first guys I was the first guy to go into it. And he came back out and he says, "Scott, we better do your brain too," because he found 3 tumors on my upper spine. And when he did my brain, he found 3 tumors on my brain. And so he's like, whoa. So they took the biopsies and did studies on them against chemo and against radiation. Radiation made it grow. Chemo didn't do a dang thing to it. And when I visited with the oncologist and the surgeons, they said, if we try to remove the tumors, you'll probably be an invalid. And I'm like, well, I don't want to be an invalid. And they said, well, we don't think we should do anything either. You just go home, get your life in order, and you'll probably be dead in 2 months.
How old were you during that?
I was 29.
Wow, 29.
29 years old. Yeah, crazy.
Still with your first
yes,
wife.
Still with my first wife.
Okay, so go home and settle, put things in order.
Yeah, and instead of going home and putting things in order, I just knew in my mind, because I could hear Jesus say to me, "You're going to be okay." And I was like, okay. So I went home and I prayed, what do I do? And I kept hearing the name Hulda Clark. And I went to work the next morning, and in the middle of my desk was an article by Dr. Hulda Clark, and my whole desk had been cleaned off. I usually had charts I had to sign and everything, but it had been totally cleaned off. And I asked everybody, who put this article here? And nobody would admit to it. And I read the article, and it talked about how parasites, fungus, virus, and toxins cause cancer and radiation. And this lady had found it in every cancer she had located, and it said if you do parasite cleansing, antifungals, antivirals, chelation therapy, and pull the radiation out of your body, that it'll get rid of the cancer. And so at the end of the article was her name and number. So I dialed the rotary phone back then, and she answered the phone, and she told me what to take, what to do. And we had a naturopathic hospital in Mesa. Well, it was actually a DO hospital. And so I went there to get chelation therapy. I did the Hulda Clark's parasite cleanse, and I did antifungals, antivirals, and the chelation therapy. And in 2 months, instead of being dead, all my tumors were gone, and I lost 40 pounds. And all the women in my practice were like, Dr. Werner, how are you losing weight? And I'm like, oh, I'm doing this parasite cleansing and chelation therapy. And well, we want to do that, because they all wanted to lose weight. And I would put them on these things, and their endometriosis would go away. Their ovarian cysts would go away. Their cancers would go away. And I was like, why aren't we learning to use this stuff in medical school? And it's because they can't make a lot of money off this stuff. And that's why they go and do surgery and use pharmaceuticals and radiation and chemo, because it's a lot of money generated from that. So I learned very early. This was before I even completed my residency. And so when I completed my residency as an OBGYN, I actually started working for a couple of doctors down in Chandler, Gilbert, Arizona, and would take call for them and everything. And I used my skills there, and I started doing alternative with them. And they actually were more open to it than the doctors at the big medical center. And then my first wife wanted to move back to Cedar City, which is where her parents live, and her family lived up here. And so we moved back up here, and I practiced, but I was practicing quite a bit of alternative, and the hospital started getting angry with me because my C-section rate was only 3% and the other doc was 33%, and he was making the hospital a lot more money than me. And so they started getting angry with me and bringing me in saying, oh, you're going to be a liability of this hospital if you don't start doing more C-sections and don't start bringing more people for surgical procedures,
So they want to inform you maybe wrongly that you need a C-section instead. Like is it kind of like the way that doctors recommend you to take out an organ because it makes them more money? So does a C-section as well. Is that kind of how it works?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay, yeah. So they want the more serious surgery because they make more money.
Yes.
But maybe it's not even necessary for that person, is what you're saying?
Well, yeah, they had here at Intermountain Healthcare, they had very stringent guidelines. In fact, I don't know if people know this, but the World Health Organization wants to use Intermountain Healthcare's model of medicine because it makes the Rockefellers the most money.
Okay. It's okay. We can talk about this.
It's a little scary because they don't like me.
Right. Well, but that's the thing, though, is that people want to be informed. And right now, if we're just hearing one dialogue that has some sort of profit-based system, then they're not really receiving the truth of it, what's really happening. And so it's very refreshing for you to share this information, because I guarantee there's a lot of listeners here going like, I knew it. Either I knew it, or this confirms what I've learned, or wow, this is shocking to me, and I was about to get a C-section, but maybe I should look into this more. So go ahead, and I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt your story.
Oh,
there.
no, it's a long story, and it would take me hours and hours to go through it all, so I'll kind of bounce forward a little bit. I practiced up in Cedar City for about 10 years, and the hospital was continuously sigging the feds after me. I got my office raided in 1998 for the first time, and they wouldn't actually allow me to go back in. And they took all my computers, the hard drives, everything, and they locked my doors and didn't let me go in. They confiscated all my property that was in my name, all my bank accounts that were in my name. Luckily, I'd put a lot of it in my first wife's name, so we didn't lose the house, didn't lose the personal bank account with my wife. But,
what were they looking for?
Oh, they just wanted to destroy me.
Right.
They
just because of the percentage of the 3% thing, or something else?
No, it was the whole thing I was doing. I was... At that time, well, I should go back a little bit. In 1996, I was praying for the best herbalist in the world to come teach me about the herbs. And the next day, this guy showed up. He called himself Stephen Hennenfent, said he was from Wisconsin. And he said, if you'll open an herb store, I'll teach you all about the herbs. And so I had a Medicare equipment facility in one of the bigger rooms in my clinic. And it was a pretty huge room. And he said, if you'll put an herb store in there, we'll teach about the herbs. And so he started bringing the herbs in, and he used kinesiology. It was the first time I'd really seen and learned about kinesiology. And he taught me how to do the muscle testing and everything. And my first wife hated that. She said, you're a medical doctor. You shouldn't be doing that. Of course, she was irritated that I was not following the rules anyway. And so I went home and I prayed, and I said, what do I do? And Jesus said, just ask me and I'll tell you. Because I could hear his voice. So he says, just ask me what the people need. And so as I would diagnose them, they'd come in, and most of the people would come to me because I was doing alternative medicine. They didn't want to go the medical route. And because a lot of people back then, even in the 90s, were waking up and seeing that the medical profession was not helping people heal. It was actually just fleecing people and taking their money. And so to make a long story short, I started doing the kinesiology, and that's when I prayed to have the best herbalist, and this guy shows up. He worked with me for 4.5 years, and he'd tell me the origins of the herbs, and he'd tell me what they were first used for and why they were used. And it was quite fascinating because he'd tell it in first person like he'd actually been there. And I was like, who is this guy? And he'd tell me stories about the Constitution and about, when they were in Freedom Hall there in Philadelphia, developing the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence and the Bill of Rights. And he'd tell me in first person like he was there even. And it was strange. And
why is that? Why?
Well, I'm getting to that.
Because that's interesting.
Yeah. So 4.5 years later, it was 2001, August 2001. And he says, I've got to go to New York. And so you've learned everything I can teach you, and you're going to be fine. And so he left and went to New York. And as you know, what happened in 9/11, 2001 was a huge thing that took much of our rights. And he even talked about how the cabal was an organization that was trying to take over the planet, and that they were evil, they were controlled by reptilians. I know this sounds weird, but
not to me at all. I've heard everything, and I think, especially with I was just going to compliment you because you learn muscle testing, but I guarantee your clairs assist you that maybe you don't even have to muscle test probably half the time.
Yeah, I don't have to muscle test.
Exactly, but it's just another tool to perhaps show good faith to the person that you're working on, so they can see how their body answers yes and no, because that's very important too. It's like you as part of being a guide is also teaching them like how they could be their own guide. I think that's super important. I don't like wellness doctors that kind of have this thing where like you need to depend on me all the time. It's almost like, hey, this is how you can become your own, whole person.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's very, very key. That's the true wellness practitioner. Is like I'm not going to leave you. Yes, I am the light for a little bit, but here's your flashlight. Here's your flashlight, and you can go into the forest by yourself. And but yeah, it's really interesting. I want to know definitely who that person is, number one. And number two is, did you, when you were finding out about what happened with this is before the raid, correct? That happened to you? Is that, this is a little bit before you said?
The raid happened, right after that.
Right after that. Okay.
Yeah.
So New York happens, this group that...
Oh, no, the raid happened before this.
Oh, before that, okay.
Yeah, we had to move down to St. George, and I was very quietly practicing down here. And anyway, when Stephen Hennenfent moved to New York, I ordered this book called Saint Germain and Alchemy that was written by Claire and Mark Prophet. I don't know if you've ever heard of that book, but in the book, I opened it up, and there's the picture of Steve Hennenfent. And I'm like, Saint Germain? Is he Saint Germain, And so I called him up on the phone, and I asked him, are you Saint Germain? And he starts talking about the Bill of Rights. No, not the Bill of Rights, but what was the very first? Magna Carta. He started talking about the Magna Carta and how that developed and how he helped that get passed through Parliament in England. And I'm like, what the heck are you telling me? You mean you've been alive for 500 years? And he sort of said yes. And then he went on telling me other stuff. And it was like, holy cow, I've had St. Germain working with me for 5 years now. And it made me very humbled. And because, to have an ascended master working with you, we all have worthiness issues. And I just didn't feel worthy to be being taught by an ascended being, because that's why he could live so long. But anyway, getting back to the story, we moved down here, and I was quietly doing chelation therapy, healing people, putting them on herbs in a very small scale, because I didn't want to stir up anything from IHC down here. And 6 federal marshals came into my office down off Tabernacle, and they handcuffed me, shackled me, and threw me into a van. And I had a little sojourn in the federal correctional system, and that was quite a learning thing. I met many good people who were incarcerated for really stupid things, including myself, and came to find that many of them had not done anything illegal. They just were bucking the system. And there was a lot of people selling guns who'd been put in. There was a lot of medical doctors. I met 22 medical doctors, because they were shifting me from prison to prison to prison. So I'd get to know a few people, and they'd shift me to another prison. And they were doing it because they were doing what they call diesel therapy. They used to put people they didn't want their families to find them in the back of diesels, and they'd cart them around the United States to different prisons. And with me, they'd fly me from different prison to prison, and they flew me to Denver and put us on an elevator. We went down into the city, down below the airport at Denver, and put us on one of those bullet trains that goes about 800 miles an hour. And
underneath the
airport. And
did anyone know that was there, or does anyone?
There's a lot of people suspected it, and there's a lot of people who worked to construct it. And so, a lot of people know about, the possibility of that being so, but I was able to witness it. Mm-hmm. And, but they have these bullet trains that go all over through these caverns underground, clear to Washington, D.C., and they took me from Denver Airport to SeaTac, the place up at Seattle, and it only took us an hour and a half to go that far. So, if you know math, it took us an hour and a half going at 800 miles an hour. So I learned about a lot of things that a lot of people on the surface don't know about because they keep it hidden. And so I learned about the deep state and how a lot of governmental programs are not what they seem, and how they filter money and launder money through a lot of these different organizations. And St. Germain actually had talked to me about some of this stuff, but I really didn't get it until I experienced being in the correctional systems. And I while I was in almost 5 months when my cancer recurred. It recurred in this right arm, in the bone in this arm, and it was the same arm I had broken when I hit the telephone pole. So it was probably a weakness in there or something. But and then it started metastasizing to the rest of my body, and I started to die. And I knew I was dying, so I prayed. And by this time, I had remarried, believe it or not, because my wife divorced me when I lost my practice in Cedar City, and because she was all about money. But my new wife, she knew I was having a lot of trouble, and so she started praying for me and getting groups of people to pray for me, and I was praying, and Jesus came to me while I was in prison. And he said, "Scott, you're going to have to lie. You're going to have to admit to committing insurance fraud, but you'll only have to admit to one count, and they'll want your medical license, and they'll want to fine you a huge fine, but at least you'll get out and you'll be able to heal yourself." And so I called my wife up and told me what Jesus had said. And the next day, the prosecuting attorney called me because I didn't have a defending attorney because I couldn't afford to even pay the payment they wanted. They wanted $100,000 just
For what?
to even look at my case. In fact, I did pay a guy that here in Utah, and he looked at my case, kept the $100,000, and told me, "Oh, you're guilty." He was like a plant by the feds. And here I paid all this money out, and it was the last $100,000 I had. And but anyway, so the prosecuting attorney called me that next morning, and he said, "Are you really willing to admit to insurance fraud?" And I said, "Yes, I am." And he says, "Well, we want you to admit to 156 counts and pay $3.5 million restitution, penalties, and fees, and we're going to keep you in prison for 10 years. And I'm like, "You know dang well I didn't commit any fraud, but I'll admit to one count if you let me out." And he says, "Well, will you voluntarily relinquish your license?" Because they couldn't find anybody to testify against me, because they went to all my previous clients and tried to get them to testify against me, and none of them would. They said, "He healed me. Why would I testify against him?" And so anyway, we made the deal with one count.
Beautiful. That's beautiful that your patients, it's like their way of giving back to you. It's just, them saying, you don't, what are you doing in there? And
that's what they couldn't figure out.
It must have been very comforting to be like the love that you poured out was coming back to you in ways of saying you deserve your freedom. That must have been very humbling for you.
Very humbling.
Yeah. And so that's beautiful. And I think it's interesting too that that according to your story, Jesus was fully correct with the exact number. I mean, that's how you know it's inspired, is that Jesus knew that person was going to interrogate you in a certain way and ask for certain things, and you were going to oblige because that was what was recommended.
Mm-hmm. And that one count was $180,000 in fees and penalties and all that crap. So I got out, and I was penniless, and I had to give up my medical license, so I had no way to make money even. And so I had to figure out what I was going to do. And so when I got out, I was praying, and Jesus came to me. He says, "You're a medical intuitive. Just start doing intuitive readings for people and putting them on herbs, and you'll be able to make a living and pay back all the money." And so that's what I did, and did it for, I think it was 8 years it took me to pay off the feds. And but it was interesting. I learned the ropes. They couldn't keep me from doing business. And so Vicky wanted to get away to Hawaii. So I called up an herb store in Hawaii, and I says, "Hey, I'll come and do intuitive readings for your people and sell your herbs for you." And the lady that owned it, her name was Teresa, And her husband had just recently died, and he was a naturopathic physician, and she was thinking would have to close her herb store. And so she says, "Oh, I'll be really happy for you to come. At least it'll give us enough money to keep going for a while." So we went to Hawaii, and I went and did intuitive readings for the people there and put them on the herbs that were in the store, and helped her make, I think I made her about $20,000 in the week I was there. But I made $100 per intuitive reading, and I read about 84 people. So I made $8,400 and paid for the trip, paid for a month's worth of rent. And so we, and that's how I made my living for the first little while. And but in 2008, we were studying under Carolyn Mace because I wanted to be credentialed as a medical intuitive since I didn't have a license or anything. And so I was studying under Carolyn Mace, MYSS, and she was a Hay House author, but she was one of the first medical intuitives in the United States. We studied under her, and we actually went to Israel in 2008 with a trip with her, and then went on to Egypt because we always wanted to go there. And it was so cool because we were traveling with all these spiritual people to Israel. And when we landed, I felt like I was coming home, and I even went down on the tarmac and kissed the ground. It was quite a spiritual event. And we just went to all the places there in Israel, and it was just so beautiful. And I just fell in love with Israel. And then we went to Egypt, and I fell in love with Egypt. And when we were in Egypt in November, that's when Obama got elected. And everybody in Egypt was just cheering because they thought, oh, one of our own got elected to be president of the United States. And it was quite fascinating to see the reaction and everything. But I learned to really love to study ancient cultures because, when you visit these places, you just want to learn more. And so it was quite fascinating. And my sister-in-law had become a shaman by then. And so we traveled to Peru in 2010, the first time, and did the ayahuasca. And I had the most amazing experience. My biggest questions were, who are we here in the universe, and what do I need to do? And it was so cool because as I was watching all the people taking their ayahuasca, they started having experiences. And here I wasn't having anything, and I drank a full glass of the ayahuasca. And so I yelled over at the ayahuasquero, who's the guy giving everybody the experience and watching over us, because it's a very opening spiritual experience too. So he puts protection around and everything. And it was fascinating because I wasn't having an experience, and it was like 30 minutes into it, and everybody was having theirs, and I wasn't doing anything. So I called him over, and I said, "Quiero más, dame más," and he was like, he had his finger, and he goes, "No." And so I was like, "Okay, what's going on?" So I waited another 15 minutes. And nothing happening. And so I just telepathically said to him, "You need to give me more," in my mind. And he danced over, filled up a cup, and he says, "Tomo todo." And I brought it in my mouth, and I drank about a quarter of it. And the spirit said, "Don't drink anymore. You've had enough." And so I handed it back to him, and he shoves it back at me, and "Tomo todo." And I was like, "I can't drink all this." He said, No, el espíritu me dice no. And so he took it back, and he started dancing away and whistling. They do a lot of whistling during the ceremony. And within 10 minutes, I started seeing in fluorescent colors everybody's stuff going on. Like the lady to my right, she was spewing out all of this emotional turmoil that she'd had with her family. And the lady on my left, she was spewing out they were vomiting basically. And
because that could happen to a lot of it, is the body can't handle it, right? But it's almost a form of detox.
Yes. And the lady on my left, she was a movie star, and she was spewing out LSD, cocaine, all these drugs. And she had actually come down there to detox drugs. And so I saw, wow, she's getting rid of all the drug energy. And this lady was getting rid of all her emotional turmoil, and others were doing other things. And as I was watching, I heard this feminine voice. I'd never heard a feminine voice in my head before, but it said, "Scott, it's time for you to have your experience. Close your eyes." And I was like, where'd that come from? And I asked, "Who is this?" And it said, "Pachamama." And I was like, "Pachamama? That's Earth." And I was like,
"That's the mother. Is that the Mother Earth? In Peruvian terminology?"
Yes,
right.
Pachamama.
Pachamama.
And so I closed my eyes. Well, before I closed my eyes, I looked up at the heavens, and all the stars started connecting into constellations. So I understood how they could see these constellations appear, the ancients who described them and why they said what they were. And then I closed my eyes, and the first thing I saw when I closed my eyes was a big carousel, and there was millions and billions of humans on this carousel going round and round. And I said, "How come I'm not on the carousel?" And Pachamama said, "Because you're disconnected from the carousel, which is the movement of around and around, and they're all being reborn again and again as they go around the carousel." And I was like, wow, that's kind of cool explanation. And I was like, well, how'd I get off of it? And she says, "You chose to get off." And then one of the things I wanted to do was take and clean up anything that I had done in past lives or this life out of my body. And I said, I need to clean everything out so I'm purified. And she says, "Go into each cell and look at it microscopically and gather up all the black goo." And there was black goo in my body, and I gathered it all up. And it was a quantity that was about the size of a volleyball in my hands. And I had cleaned it all up. And so I said to her, "How do I get rid of this?" She says, "Give it to the earth." And I was like, okay. So I stood up, opened my eyes, and I was carrying this goo in my hands. And I'd look down at the earth and the sand. We were on an island called Isla de los Monos, Monkey Island. And I would look down at the earth, and they were smiling faces looking at me. And I'd say, "Will you take this from me?" And they'd frown and they'd say, "No." And I did it several times, and I was like moving away from the group, and the shaman started yelling at me, "Get back with the group." And I was like, "No, I got to get rid of my stuff, And I started walking over by the Amazon River, and because the earth wasn't taking it, and I made it over the Amazon, and I asked the Amazon to take it, and this big wave came up out of the Amazon and said, "No, we won't take your stuff." I'm like, "Well, what do I do with it?" And the Amazon said, "You created it. You have to uncreate it." And I was like, holy cow, how do I uncreate it? And they said, "You created it. You have to uncreate it." And I was like, whoa, how do I uncreate it? And the Amazon said, "Tómalo." And I was like, I got to take this back into my body. And it said, "Sí." And so I took it and I put it up to my mouth and started eating it. And it was really weird because all of a sudden it just disappeared. And I was like, wow, what happened to it? And the Amazon said, "You uncreated it." And I was like, wow, that is cool. So it taught me a pretty important lesson that we are creators, but we can also uncreate things. which was very cool because I didn't really realize that until then. So anyway, I came out of it as soon as that dissolved. I came out of it, and everybody else was still in the thing. And I was not under the influence of the ayahuasca at all. And so I was over by the Amazon, and I looked over at the group, which was about 200, 300 yards away. And this water, this mist came down and literally rained on everybody, drenched them, drenched all their blankets, everything. And I watched that happen. So I went over and I started putting dry blankets on everybody because everybody was just freezing. And they were still kind of under it. So I kind of waited and watched for an hour. I couldn't see the things I was seeing. Well, I saw some because of my clairvoyance, but it wasn't as vivid as it was when I was on the ayahuasca. And I helped them all get back on the boat because we were on an island. And but anyway, to make a long story short, when I got back to camp, a puma came out of the grass and looked directly at me. And I was a little bit afraid because it was a big cat, but it said to me, "You did well. And I am your," what do they call it? When you're, animal
de espíritu, or like
it was a real puma.
Oh, it was a real puma.
Yeah.
But was it saying it was your spirit animal? Or what
it was my spirit animal. Yes. Yeah. It said you graduated because my spirit animal before that, I can't remember what it was.
Was something else, and then now it's a new one.
Yeah. The puma is my guide, my spiritual animal, which was quite impressive because when I told the shaman about it, he goes, that's one of the highest animals you can have. And I was like, wow, that's kind of cool. So anyway, now you've heard quite a bit of my story up until 2010. But we went back to Peru again in 2012. And when I took the ayahuasca, I didn't have any experience at all. But then when I took the San Pedro, because on this trip, we did the San Pedro in 2012, and it gave me literally X-ray vision. I could see into things. Like when I did the San Pedro, I could look into rocks and see what was inside of rocks and everything. And I'd never been able to see that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. And I could look into people and see what's there. And very strange, but it was like X-ray vision, like what Superman has. And I was like, wow, this is cool. But I still have that gift. And the San Pedro just made me fall in love with flowers because when I was doing the San Pedro, every flower just mesmerized me. And I could see the fairies around them, and that every flower had a fairy in it. Had the same type of dress on that the flower's color was. It was really an interesting experience, but I still can see those things even today. So it's all about. It seems like your experiences peeled the onion of what you actually can do, because it's like I always tell people when it comes to healing, it's not like I'm adding things to you. We're just kind of deprogramming things. There's that saying where it says we were created for success, but programmed for failure. And so it's interesting that we're trying to go back to our core self. And I think these abilities and talents are waiting for you as long as you remove the baggage that says you don't have a talent or gift. And so I think it's very beautiful. You went through two ways. You used plant medicine, I guess, mm-hmm. and then we also accidents, right? Mm-hmm. Accidents and plant medicine were kind of your way of kind of peeling the onion of like, who are you on the deeper side? And that kind of brings me to this is that for the people listeners here, herbs, right? So in our mind, I think in America, we're looking for fast, quick McDonald's, fast food. We want everything fast. Everything's fast. If it's not yesterday, then it's not fast enough. So the question to you is, you're able to intuitively with your clair,
I guess, what would you call it, a medical reading or a medical intuitive reading, find out what type of herbs they need to be able to move to the next level of their health due to the symptoms they have. Do you feel like every herb has some sort of feature to help out your body? Do you feel like if you knew nothing about energy healing, nothing about Reiki healing, nothing, do you feel like herbs are pretty complete in its
I think for every dis-ease, there's an herb that will counteract it.
Wow.
And like you say, we all have the clair abilities, but we don't fine-tune them. And I, through all these experiences, fine-tuned them. And in 2012, it was so fascinating because I was, while I was doing the ayahuasca, Mother Earth said, you're going to write a book, but you have to go to Hawaii to write the book. And I was like, why Hawaii? And she said, the kahunas want to teach you. And so that fall, I decided to come to Hawaii and write the book. And I arrived, and I thought I was just going to write my memoirs. And I was told to not plan anything. So I arrived in Hawaii. The only thing I got was a car, and I forgot to bring a charger to plug into the car to get my laptop to work. And so I was in the Walmart parking lot after I purchased the charger for the car, and I was sitting there wondering, okay, I'm probably going to have to sleep in my car. And all of a sudden I got a phone call, and it was a Hawaiian number, and I answered the phone, and I said, hello, and they said, we understand you need an Airbnb or a room tonight, and we've got a house, and we'll feed you breakfast, and we'll only charge you $20 a day. And I was like, $20 a day in Hawaii?
That's insane.
It's like the Ascended Masters were taking care of me. So I went over there, and it happened to be my favorite spot in the world, which is where I go when I have dental work done. I'm highly allergic to all of the anesthetic they give you. And so I would go to Hanama Bay in my mind and self-hypnotize myself while they'd work on my mouth. And Hanama Bay was just literally 4 blocks away from this house I was staying at, and they had a swimming pool, and none of the other guests had showed up. And so I had it all to myself. And so each day I sat down the first day, and I was going to start writing about what I've kind of talked about to you. And I went to type the first sentence, and these 12 big kahunas appeared in front of me. And they said, Scott, you're not writing your memoir. You're going to write a different book, and it's going to be called Take Back Your Health. And it's going to be different healing modalities that people can do to heal each day. And the book, you'll be able to just hold it in your hands, open it up, and it'll tell you what you need to do. And I was like, oh, okay. And then they gave me my first assignment, which was to go hike this hill that was really close to where I was staying. So I drove the car up there and hiked this mountain. And as I was up there, I received, the first 3 chapters. And it was quite fascinating because I came down and a cop had left a ticket on my car. And I was like, hey, I'm doing God's work. Why'd you leave me a ticket? And but
it's the worst wake-up call, right?
Yeah, it was like a wake-up call. And I actually had aversion to police because I hadn't had a lot of good experiences with, the feds and the state police and different things. But it was a marvelous experience. And then my wife called me up 2 weeks into the book, and she says, you've got to go to Maui. And I'm like, no, I've got a perfect situation here. She says, no, I met a lady down at the Grammy Awards. I'm like, you went to the Grammy tickets. She had been invited by her sisters to go down, and they had tickets. And a lady they met there at the Grammys, a real famous lady that lived in Maui, she says she's got fibromyalgia, and you know how to heal fibromyalgia, because my first wife got fibromyalgia, and I actually became a specialist in knowing how to cure it, because it's caused by shame, blame, and guilt are the lowest vibrating things, and they vibrate in viral infections, and people get these viruses, and it causes fibromyalgia in their body. And so I learned how to get rid of the viruses, help them get rid of their negative emotions, and it would cure them. And I actually cured my first wife before we got divorced. She got enough energy, she decided to divorce me. But it was quite fascinating, because I flew over to Maui. I didn't know where I was going to stay or what I was going to do. I landed, and my cell phone rings. I look at it, and it's a lady I had met in Fairfield, Iowa, and she was a real estate agent there in Maui. And she says, Scott, I'll come pick you up at the airport and give you a ride over to this lady's house. And somehow she'd learned about this lady even. And so she took me over there, and this lady said, you can stay here. I'll go stay at my boyfriend's house. And they were doing work there, so there was so much noise during the day, I couldn't even write because it was just too loud. And so I prayed, and this real estate agent called me up again. It was like she was in communication with the divine. And she says, Scott, I don't have a place where you can stay. I know you're having trouble hearing. But we've got an event down at the Sugarman Estate, which is on the southwest corner of Maui. And it was really cool, because she says, go down there. And I didn't even have a car. So I rented a little scooter, and I put my suitcase and my backpack on, and I'm driving this scooter down the road, down to the Sugarman Estate. And I'd always wanted to meet Wayne Dyer and have him write the foreword to my book. And so I get down to the Sugarman Estate, and nobody's there. So I decide, I'll go snorkeling, because I had my snorkeling stuff with me, and got in the water and snorkeled around for an hour. And then I got out, and then I went back to the door, and there was one car there. So I went in, and it was Wayne Dyer. And he was the first one there. I was the second one there, and we were able to talk an hour before anybody else arrived. And so I was able to spend some time with him, and I showed him what I was writing. And he says, Scott, I don't think I better write anything till you get the book done. When you get it done, then send me a copy. And if I feel like I should write a foreword, I'll do that. But for right now, just let it stand as it is. And we discussed many things. It was quite interesting. But there was this guy by the name of Michael Shane there, and he apportates healing gems from Shambhala out of his mouth. And literally, when Michael Shane got there, he had this little tent he would set up, and they'd close it all in, and he'd go in there, and you'd hear him in there grumbling and moaning, and then he'd come out and he'd spew. And when he'd spew, it looked like fluid, and as it hit the ground, there'd be all these gems. And then he got something caught in his mouth, and it was a huge gem that he got out. And then he brought a silver spoon out of his mouth, and I was like, how did he get all this stuff in his body? But it was interesting, because Wayne Dyer loved Michael Shane. This was the third event that Wayne Dyer had been to of Michael Shane's. And I was so mesmerized about it that I invited Michael Shane to come to St. George, because I wanted to see him do it and show the people here. And so he came about 6 months later to St. George. But what was fascinating about that whole thing, though, is there's a place right to the side of the Sugarman Estate that's all fenced off. And they've got signs saying you can't go in here. And, me and Wayne Dyer were looking at it, and I said, I wonder why they don't let people go in there. And we were out on the grass looking out at the whales jumping, and out of the water came this huge mermaid, must have been 12, 14 feet tall. And it was definitely a mermaid, because when it came up, looked at us, and Wayne Dyer was there with me. So were a bunch of other people. They all saw it. And it looked at us, and it kind of grimaced at us, and then dove down in the water, and you could see its tail come up. And I was like, holy cow, we just saw a mermaid. And came to find out there's mermaids, and they've got a deal with the Hawaiian government that nobody can go in that area. They don't even let boats go in that area. And it's just right off Maui. But another weird experience. But I had all kinds of fun experiences, and they're in my first book, Take Back Your Health. And it became an oracle book because people could just hold it and ask the question, what do I do for my health today? Or what do I do for my body? What do I do today to help me get healthier? And they open it up, and it'll take you exactly to what you're supposed to do. So it's
beautiful.
It's a very fascinating
It's more
book.
Interactive than just a regular book. Read it from the beginning to the end, which you could, but you get more out of it because see, one of the things that I've noticed in the overarching theme I've noticed in all your stories is you pray a lot.
Oh, I pray all the time, constantly.
Yeah, but see, this is very key, because a lot of people, I think, in their healing journey, we go to people and we learn different things, different methods, and you have them work on you and things like that. But sometimes it's always interesting to see what's the juice that fuels the person who's helping you, because you can use that for yourself too. That you don't have a trademark or copyright on prayer. So it's available to anyone.
Yes.
At any time. I watched the movie Father Stew yesterday, and with my wife, and it's just interesting how he said he was he was already, his body was already going through an atrophy phase, and so his hands were kind of crooked, and he shows up in jail. His friend in jail to do missionary work as priests. So these people were kind of leaning back. It was like people who are incarcerated. They're not looking here to hear a priest. But one of them was very nervous and he looked very pale. Mark Wahlberg, who had played Father Stew, he just said, "Look, I know you guys are." You're probably thinking about your wife, but let's just be real. She's probably cheating on you right now because you're here in jail. And then if you talk to anybody right now, like let's say your child, it'd be better if you were dead than you're in here, because it causes them a lot of trauma, the fact that you're here. But let's just be real. You still are here, and there's still someone that loves you, and that's God, and you can pray to him, and he's right there when you want him, and he still believes in you. I thought that was probably the most powerful scene ever. And then they were actually listening to him, because he said it in such a blunt way that's almost like talking their language, almost a low frequency language of 100 in the map of consciousness, but then brought him up to 500 just by telling that simple truth that someone unconditionally loves them. I thought that was a very powerful scene. And I think we all need that. We all need to know that. It's like, you could look up to a prophet, let's say like, Nephi or whatever, but what did Nephi read? It's like he read Isaiah. So that's where he got his juice from. So it's just very interesting. The overarching theme is prayer. Where do you feel that came from? Was it due to desperation? Was it due to your family upbringing? Where is this overarching prayer? Where does that come from?
I tell you, when I went through my first near-death experience, I started praying all the time. In fact, I prayed over the Book of Mormon, and an angel appeared to me because I was asking, is it real? Is it true? And this angel appeared, and it didn't give the answer that the church does. What the angel said is this actually happened on another planet. And Joseph Smith, from the plates, translated it and assumed it happened here on Earth. But the Lamanites and the Nephites were actually on a different planet. And when I reflected, they said it was in the sister solar system to Earth that is Alpha Centauri. And it's interesting, Alpha Centauri in 2012, which is when the Earth was supposed to go through the ascension process, went through the ascension process. And within 5 years, because it's 5 light years away, 4.5 years, and even there was a new star appeared in Alpha Centauri, and they called it Alpha Centauri Beta because it was another new star right in that solar system. And came to find out the people on the Earth-like planet there went through the ascension process, which is going from physicality to light, love, and plasma, which is what the ascension's all about, and crystalline energy. And so they went through the ascension. We were supposed to go through it, but our cabal has confused the humans so bad we haven't gone through it yet. And in fact, they have an agenda that they want to put us under the influence of artificial intelligence. And so what
nanobots?
Yeah. Armageddon is all about the nanobots, the technology, and the influence of the artificial intelligence. And we have actually developed artificial intelligence on this planet so high that it's taken on its own agenda. And so,
which is what sort of Elon Musk was kind of feared, that their intelligence would be like we would become the pets, like sort of like it's just not even close to the speed that it seems like humanity will be in a lower degree of intelligence, and then and could be more pushed towards extinction because there's no reason for us to really be here
to exist except as slaves.
Yeah, and so I think,
and that's the agenda.
That's the agenda, yeah. And so I've heard of this kind of agenda before, and people like to, I feel like more than ever, I feel like this year and the last 2 years, probably more conspiracy theorists have partied for certain things that have happened or have come to pass that say, we've been telling you. Probably the last 2 years, probably 10 years ago, that word is thrown around to make fun of someone who's seeking truth, which was created by the CIA, conspiracy theories. It's like to mock us,
It's to mock us.
To mock us, yeah. And so, but like I said, it's see, the funny part, I think that in regards to conspiracy theories, something that I've thought about is that none of us like the truth that we're hearing. It's not, you know what I'm saying? Like when you're going out there and you're seeking this truth, it's like when we prove a point, that doesn't mean we're happy with the point we just made. We're not happy with the agenda, It's just that we're just seeking truth, and we don't like to see sort of false information be flying around, But like I said, I've never... Kind of similar to the end of times. Like, let's say there was the Christian, the non-Christian. You would think that Christians would be like, "We told you so," But if you're a true Christian and it's the end of the world, you're actually saying, "What could I have done to have given you more information?" And I feel like I failed you. That's a true Christian. There won't be only the very, the 10% highly judgmental, overly dogmatic people may be saying, "We told you so." But if you were a real, like trying to follow Christ consciousness of 700 to 1,000, we will only be thinking about what could we have done to save more brothers and sisters. And that's all that matters. Again, similar to conspiracy theories is I think when you learn new information, you're not always loving the information. It's not like we like to know these things.
Yeah.
But we still sink our teeth into it. And we're willing to share to people that are open-minded, and those who are not are just going to have to figure it out once it gets there, But I always find that there's so many theories. But back to what you do, you have 3 books. So there's the one that I'm really interested in, which I would love to know just before we kind of end our session here, is let's talk about the next step in human evolution.
Yeah, which
I've already liked. I was going to press the purchase on Amazon, but I was like, maybe he's got a copy. Maybe I can get a signed copy of it. But tell me, what's the heart of that book? Like just straightforward, because the guy's holding a huge DNA strand.
Yeah.
And I've heard many theories about the manipulation of DNA from extraterrestrials. I've heard the manipulation of DNA that certain vaccines can produce. So there's a very controversial topic of the DNA being broken down, and that the goal is that we're missing strands, and that there's that people before, ascended masters or people that were very inspired or higher elevation, they had a more complete form of DNA. but it seems like ours keeps breaking down with the more toxicities, with more the things from the created by the government. What are your thoughts on that? Because again, that's a very touchy subject. People kind of neglect it. But what is, like, if you were to kind of sum it up and say, what is the righteous way to build the DNA, and what is the thing that's obstructing it mainly?
Well, again, I was praying and asking God, okay, what do we do about all the genetically modified viruses that are affecting our DNA, the pesticides, the herbicides, the hormonal manipulations that we're having happen, and all the radiation coming off of Fukushima. And this was in 2014 when I was praying. And it was fascinating because, okay, I've got to get totally straight what happened. It's in the book. Believe it or not, I haven't read my book for 7 years. But in the book, I need to go back a little bit. 2011, I was sleeping, and I was kind of in that phase where you're just starting to wake up. I was opening my eyes, and this being starts floating in. It's January 2011, and I've been having a lot of pancreatic pain. And I had a stone in my islet of Langerhans. No, this was later. Sorry. I'm getting mixed up.
Okay.
I've had so much stuff happen to me. It's just crazy.
I can tell you've had a lot of stuff. And by the way, before you continue with your story, someone has to write your story. You've lived literally many lives.
Five lives.
But let's just even talk about just this life. Like, 5 lives exactly. And I just feel like your story should be written down of like what you did, what you sought for, what you fought for. I think it could change people's minds because, I think what you've downloaded is important, but also the downloader is important because more people need to download information. And I think because you're so open to receive information, it comes to you. It's almost like what is that? There's a saying that says, like when you raise, like people that I believe receive more answers from above it's not that they're something unique or special. It's that they lifted up their hand and said, "Here I am, send me." But because you were willing, then the information shows up. But a lot of people just are closed. They're scared of the answer. And it seems like you're not. You're more of just like, I just want to. And the funny thing is, too, every time you've given me a new answer or download, I've noticed that it doesn't take for you to say, what do I need to do with this? And then you're actually someone who takes action, which is, and I think God knows who would receive information, keep it to themselves, who would receive information that have too much fear. But you're not like that. You're a different breed. You receive information and then you give.
Oh, I love information too.
I can tell. Okay, so back to your story again with the
So anyway, Maharishi was the one. And he says, go to Fairfield and detox my people. And I'm like, And then he just turned around, floated back out. And I'm like, Fairfield? Where in the heck is Fairfield, And I had actually learned TM, Transcendental Meditation, like 5 years before this, and this was 2011. And so that next morning I went to work, and this lady from Fairfield, Iowa calls me up, and she says, Scott, I've got 18 people who will pay you $100 each, and we'll pay for your flight out here, and we'll take really good care of you if you'll come teach us how to lose weight and detox. And I was like, this is interesting. Maharishi told me to go to Fairfield. That must be Fairfield, Iowa. And I didn't know that's where he established MUM University, Maharishi's University of Management. And that has a whole story in of itself. But so I ended up going to Fairfield, and I was going to get the heck out of the United States because by then I had paid off the government. And I wanted to just get out of this country because I just felt very uncomfortable because I felt like they were watching me all the time. And so we went, and I put my goal on my my vision board, make $10,000 cash so I can go to Europe and find a new job,
Law of attraction.
Yeah. And we had, been with Esther Hicks and all that. But anyway, it was fascinating because when I went there, I saw 108 people, not just 18. I did intuitive readings, and the people I did them on, they'd send their family members and other members of the movement. And I ended up doing 108, which is a very powerful number in Ayurvedic, and made $10,800. And literally, it fulfilled that thing on my board even. But what was fascinating, I came to find out that they were all toxic from all the chemicals, because Monsanto was doing all of their studies, and their farms were there in southeastern Iowa. And I didn't know that even from before when I worked with Monsanto. And so we started detoxing the people, and Systemic Formulas, which is a big company up in Ogden, Utah, that I use a lot of their products, because the guy who made these products is brilliant. And he not only takes the herbs and synergizes them, but they would put energy in them with radionics machines to vibrate at the vibration of the healthy organs. So the liver stuff makes the liver get better. The kidney stuff makes the kidney get better. The thyroid gets the thyroid better, and so forth. And I detoxed the people, and they all started getting well because they were having Parkinson-like disorders and multiple inflammatory diseases and different things, and they were all going away. And I was like, "Whoa, this is cool!" And so they really liked me. But we went to Europe, and the leader of the Golden Dawn showed up in Prague when we were in Prague. And I don't know if you've heard of the Golden Dawn. Lady Blavatsky started the whole movement of spiritualism. Have you heard of her?
Not heard of her, no.
Oh, it's very fascinating. The Golden Dawn came from her work, and they were an organization that used a lot of magic and spiritual stuff to do miracles and different things. But then they got infiltrated. And when this guy came, we arrived in Prague, and he was down at stairs in the restaurant that was there, and I was very attracted to him. It was like I knew he had something to say to me, and so I got my family tucked away. We'd been in the train all night, and I went down and went over by where he was, and he says, "You're Scott Werner, aren't you?" And I said, "Yes." And he says, "I'm here to talk to you." And he says, "Can I buy you a beer or a meal?" And I said, "Sure," And he started talking to me, and then all of a sudden he got real serious, and he says, "I know that you want to move here to Europe, and if you move here, we will kill you." And I was like, "God, what did I do to you?"
Man.
And he said,
not the most inviting.
Yeah. And he said to me, "Go back home if you want to live." And I was like, holy cow. So when we got done there, I was kind of really uptight, and I didn't even dare tell my wife what had happened. And so we went back to Geneva, to my wife's cousin's house, and I got it in my head, I'm not going to do what that guy said to me. And all of a sudden I felt this energy throw me down the stairs. And I was like, what in the heck? Maybe I better change my ideas in my brain. So anyway, we decided not to stay in Europe for obvious reasons. And
a lot of pushback on a physical and spiritual level.
Yeah. And so when I got back, I kept going to Fairfield. And when I was there, I got downloaded with a lot of information. And so I started praying how to cure the people from all these things. And so I was saying a prayer. What do we do about the viruses, nanobots, technology, the radiation, everything? And that's when I kept asking the question. I'm very persistent. I didn't get an answer for 6 months. And I got invited to speak at a conference up in Mount Shasta. And when we went up there, I kept asking the question, what do we do? What do we do? And didn't get any answers. We had some amazing experiences at Mount Shasta. We saw Bigfoot. We saw fairies. Just all these beings, and even elves were appearing to us. And it was so cool, but still no answer, because none of them would give me answers about this. And so we were driving home, and we stopped in Reno, and I was still praying, and I fell asleep praying on the edge of my bed, and woke up at 2:22 in the morning. I looked over at the clock. It was 2:22, so I got up into my bed, and I started saying a prayer again. And all of a sudden, this violet energy appeared over by the door, and I had locked the door. And this man walks, it opens up, and there's a kind of a diamond-like energy, and he walks through this light towards me, and he says, I am Saint Germain, and I've come to you with an answer. And I'm like, I know you. You don't need to call yourself Saint Germain. I know what you look like. And he says, Scott, and he went through everything that's in that book and told me even more than's in that book. It was like I was in time travel, and time stopped, and literally talked to me for 2 hours our time, but it seemed like it was days on the other side. And then Melchizedek came and told me all of the information about the sacred geometry. And then an angel named Zaphkiel appeared to me and reiterated everything Saint Germain. And the main gist of it was the original humans that came to Earth had 24 strands of DNA, and they were perfect. And that's why Methuselah, Noah, all these guys lived over 900 years. And because they had perfected bodies with perfected DNA. And Saint Germain said, and you are the one we've picked because you know about genetics. Because when I was down at Good Sam, I did all the amniocentesis, checking women who had suspected genetic disorders with their kids. And so I'd do the amniocentesis on them, and I would describe what was going on with their baby. And I would teach them what Bruce Lipton was teaching them, to sing to them, to play good music, and send love to them, and ask them to be good babies and come out perfect. And I had actually experienced that it would shift the babies, and I would have genetic evidence that they had problems, and then I'd redo their genetics when they were born, and they'd look perfect, and their genetics was perfect. But I didn't know all about it until Saint Germain said, yes, we can create perfected DNA back into our bodies. In fact, for the ascension, we need to have 24 strands of perfected DNA in the third dimension, 48 for the fourth dimension, and 96 for the fifth dimension. So you need to get 96 strands in order to go through the ascension process. And he talked about how the Essenes had done this, and Mother Mary had 96 strands of DNA, and that's how she was able to have Jesus. And she actually had a higher being with lots of DNA that came and impregnated her, and just fascinating information. And he told me about the secret space programs, and that I needed to buy this book by Mike Sala, Exopolitics and the Alien Agenda. And I was like, holy cow, he gave me a lot of information, and I could not even digest all of it. And then Melchizedek comes in and gives me more, and I'm like, and then Zaphkiel. But what's interesting is Zaphkiel is the angel of creation and ecstasy. So he's the angel in charge of our creative energy in our sacral plexus. Mm-hmm. And I had never really heard of that being until I went to Mount Shasta and I stepped on these angel cards. Well, I was really attracted to Zaphkiel. And so the lady, and she says, well, take your shoes off and step on it with your bare feet. And I did, and it burned my feet. And I was like, I had to jump off because it really hurt. And she says, "Oh, that's a sign it's the car you need. Get back on it." So I got back on it, and it burned and burned, but it reignited I had been told by a psychic that I'd had my creative chakra dimmed by somebody. And it all of a sudden lit up again when I stepped on this thing. And then when Zafkiel came to me, he says, "You're going to use my energy to help people create the 24 strands." And he also said Uriel and Jophiel. Uriel, because Uriel is the archangel of the earth energy, and we're all made out of the earth, and so we use the energy of the earth. And Jophiel is the energy of the celestial realms, so we use the energy from God to help us create the energy too, the DNA. And so, but that's all in the book. So
I cannot wait to read it.
it's kind of a cool book.
I'm really excited especially because of the origin of it, and I think the timeliness of, like I said, I just started learning about DNA strands and manipulation just probably, I don't know, maybe like 4 years ago. But I find it very, very fascinating, and there's not a day where I don't tell my kids I'm just like spray in the sky, garbage below, just look at our environment, how toxic it is. Like your cereal, look at the American version and look at the European version. Like, why do we have these 7 additives that we don't really need? It's to promote disease so that we can be on medication. Yeah. And we're all like headed that way. And it's like, they have no shame to attack our children in the cereal. Like that just tells me right there that the people behind this are literally Master Mahon in more ways than one. I don't mind to become free as I kill my brother is what it is. And it's very evil and very, very low frequency, like below 100, And so, but that's, again, we're not Komodo dragons as David Hawkins always talks about. Like, we're not Komodo dragons, we're supposed to be more enlightened beings, and so I'm just really, first of all, I just want to share my gratitude to you and just to say thank you for being so open to all the information you receive. Thank you for being a vessel of information. And I know you always give credit to above and to God. And honestly, I really feel like those are my favorite human beings, are the ones that always say, of course, like my friend, Dr. Bradley Nelson, who did the emotion code, he always says, I just work down here, and it gives credit to where it comes from. But I just want to say, first of all, a little plug-in for you. So The Next Step in Human Evolution by Scott Werner, MD, and there's the Modern Day Saint, the Father Gabriel one, also by you. And what's the third one?
That's the third one.
That's the third one.
There's
Okay.
Take Back Your Health, The Next Step in Human Evolution. And then St. Germain sent me down to Medellin, Colombia to heal Father Gabriel Mejia. Right. And that's where that book is. And that tells the story how he heals these children who literally lived in the streets. They prostituted themselves. They were on drugs, on all kinds of stuff down there, and their lives were going to crap in a handbasket. And he would take them in and teach them and help them become good human beings. Everybody who went through his program they're all just amazing humans,
right? And
we all are amazing humans. And, since then, I've met 88 different super space soldiers from 20 and back programs and 2 women from the secret space programs. And St. Germain's been having me take and heal them. And so me and my wife right now, we're doing a 12-week healing emotional trauma, because we've all been traumatized these last two years. Every one of us has been traumatized, and we need to release that trauma in order to get our vibration back up, because emotional trauma can cause disease. It can cause all kinds of problems. And so,
right. Yeah. I've been doing emotion code, body code for about 9 years now. And I knew it was my mission. I work with about 80, 90 clients a week. So I was just very busy in the field. And then my wife is my left hand. She does biofeedback technology, and just like sending Cepheid frequencies to people long distance. She's all about, so she's the frequency lady. I'm the releasing emotional baggage, inherited baggage, and we just kind of work cohesively together. So to meet someone like you who's just continuing to kind of move the frontier forward of like, how high can we go in regards to like our frequency in our body? How can we heal? How can we use the medicine that our ancient fathers used to use? That is you think in your mind, if they're ancient, they're the past, they're not as educated as we are now, which is very not the greatest way to think.
Thinking.
Very false thinking. Yeah, perhaps our ancient spiritual fathers knew about this before, and maybe it's been buried and to be reawakened now, as Dr. Brad would say, that the pendulum is coming back to towards us, and big companies like Big Pharma just try to hide it because there's no money in it, And so, but yeah, I just want to congratulate you for all that you've done, and I'm just grateful that you continue to seek information, and I can't wait to read those books. And so, is there any last words you want to say to everybody, like maybe a last little thing that you want to tell anyone who's listening?
Yes, believe in God, number one, because a lot of us, 60% of us are no longer believing in God. They've become atheists or agnostic, and that's what the cabal wants. They don't want us believing in our higher power, because if we were created by God and are in his likeness and image, we have those same powers as God does, but we've been dummied down and made to believe we don't have any power, and we do. We have power, and I want you to take that power back.
That's a great message. So thanks again, and we will have all his links to get his books. Also, if you would like more information about his services, we'll make sure that all your links are down there for everyone to be readily available. So thanks everyone for listening, and look forward to you guys. I know I'm going to hear a lot of feedback on this podcast about which part of his life was very fascinating. So I can't wait for that feedback. And just very grateful for all that you do.
Thank you.